Lesson 10-4, covering solving quadratic equations by factoring. So there are multiple ways of solving a quadratic. One way is graphing, another way is factoring. So the key concept in this lesson, part of it would be using the square root property. And the square root property just says to solve a quadratic equation in the form of x squared equaling n, take the square root of each side. And just know that when you find the square root of a number, you get a positive and a negative root. So in this case, the square root of square root of 49 is a positive and negative 7. And if it's not a perfect square, like the square root of 49, then you might get an answer that's an irrational number. So you might have to approximate the square root, or you can put it into radical form, which will give you the exact answer. And for that, you will have to use your calculator to estimate. So question 1 says solve each equation around to 2 decimal places if needed. So here I have on the left-hand side a quadratic. So y plus 5 squared equaling 21. So if on one side I have a set of parentheses and inside I have an expression and I'm just squaring everything inside there with one variable, all I need to do is find the square root of both sides to undo a square. So that means I have y plus 5 equaling the square root of 21 and the square root of 21, and we're going to round it to 2 decimal places. So on my calculator, I'm going to do the square root of 21, and I get 4.582. So to 2 decimal places, that would give me a positive 4.58 and a negative 4.58. Now I can just solve for y by subtracting 5 on both sides. And 4.58 minus 5 gives me a negative 0.42. And over here gives me a negative 9.58. So I would have these two solutions as my y. The second one, x plus 6 squared equals 81. Again, I can find the square root of both sides, and I get x plus 6 equaling square root of 81 is a positive 9 and a negative 9. And then subtract 6 on both sides to solve for x. And I would have x equaling 3 and x equaling a negative 15. Next one, I find the square root of both sides here. And I have y minus 4 equaling the square root of 56. And the square root of 56 to 2 decimal places is 7.48 and a negative 7.48. Add 4 to both sides. And I'm left with y equaling 11.48. And that would be a negative 3.48. Next, let's look at all the solutions of x minus 2 squared equaling 16. Well, I know I can find the square root of both sides because I have a quadratic on the left-hand side. So that will give me x minus 2 equaling a positive 4 and a negative 4. And then if I add 2 to both sides, I end up with x equaling 6 and x equaling a negative 2. So I see c is a negative 2, and I see a positive 6. F is a positive 6. But that would be my solution for that one. For this final one, find the square root of both, and I would have y plus 18 equaling, and the square root of 77 to 2 decimal places is a positive 8.77 and a negative 8.77. I'm going to subtract 18 on both sides. And so I have 8.77 minus 18 gives me a negative 9.23. And I see that right here. And then I add those two together to give you a negative 26.77 and a negative 26.77 is left. Example 2, now you're doing the same thing, but it's in a word problem format. So it says during the egg drop competition at Anika's school, students must create a container for an egg that prevents the egg from breaking when dropped from a height of 30 feet. The formula h equals negative 16t squared plus h subscript 0 can be used to approximate the number of seconds t it takes for the container to reach the height h from an initial height of h subscript o or 0 in feet. Find the time it takes the container to reach the ground. Now there's a couple ways of doing this. You could graph this and then find the 0, or we know that the starting height, and that's where subscript O is 30 feet. So if I put 30 feet in for subscript 0, now I can solve. Remember, I want to find it when it hits the ground. That means the height has to equal 0. So to do that, I subtract 30 on both sides, and I'm left with negative 16t squared equaling a negative 30. To get t squared by itself, I divide by negative 16. And 30 divided by negative 16 gives me a positive 1.875. Then I find the square root of both sides, and the square roots of our answer would give us roughly a positive and a negative 1.37. But I can only use the positive form because a negative amount of seconds would not make sense. Second one, they're doing the same thing, but with a watermelon. And our formula right here is the same formula as we did with our last problem, but here the starting height says the initial height of 84 feet. This 18-foot long wooden watermelon opens and drops actual watermelons. So this is just the machine that they're using. So the 18 feet does not do anything to the problem. So I need to find when does it hit the ground when the starting height is 84 feet. So I do the same thing, subtract 84. And I get negative 84 equaling a negative 16 t squared. To get t squared by itself, I divide by negative 16. And 84 divided by negative 16 gives me a positive and a negative, or gives me a 5.25. So t squared equals 5.25. And to undo a square, I find the square root. And because I'm dealing with time, I only need to use the positive root. So the square root 5.25 equals 2.29 seconds. The next concept is more with factoring. So the zero product property, all the zero product property says is that the product of two factors is 0, then at least one of the factors must be 0. And so we went through some different kinds of factoring. We've used distributive property before, which just means you're factoring out a common factor out of all the terms, because that's the opposite of the distributive property. If I were to distribute an x, I would have ax bx plus ay and by. We've also gone through in module 9 factoring quadratic trinomials. So again, you find out what do you multiply to get c, but add them together gives you your b. And then there's two more where we went through differences of two squares. It means I have a perfect square here and a perfect square here. And that gives me my binomials here. To do that, remember you find the square root of both perfect squares. And the only difference is you have a plus and a minus. And then we have factoring perfect squares, which means a perfect square trinomial. So a squared plus 2ab plus b squared is the same thing as saying a plus b squared. Now this sign and this sign must be the same. Okay, all that is review. So based on the problem you get, that's how you would factor. So question 3. Solve 4x squared minus 12x squared x equaling 0, check your solution. So the first thing I want to do is, I know it's not a difference of two squares because I don't have two squares present. I know it's not a trinomial because I only have two terms. But I know they both share 4x in common. So now I factor out a 4x out of both terms. So 4x squared divided by 4x is x. 12x divided by 4x is 3. And this all has to equal 0. Once you have factored out completely, you make each factor equal to 0. And then you solve for x. So the opposite of multiplying by 4 is divide by 4. And I'm left with x equaling 0. Over here, I add 3 to both sides, and I get x equaling a positive 3. So my solutions would be x equaling 0 and x equaling 3. Next example. Again, I have just two terms. And I look, 18 and 6, the common factor of 18 and 6 is 6. Common factor of y squared and y is just 1y. If I divide that out, I end up with 3y minus 1. Both of them equal 0. So 6y equaling 0, and then 3y minus 1 equaling 0. To get y by itself, I divide by 6. Then I get left with y equaling 0. Here, I add 1 first, and I have 3y equaling 1. Then divide by 3, y would equal 1/3. So I would have two solutions. That means it crosses the x-axis 2 times on a coordinate plane. Next, solve by factoring a trinomial. And then they also want you to graph the roots and graph the whole quadratic. I have a trinomial here, so I have to think, what do I multiply to get -8, but add them together gives me -2? That would be a -4 and a +2. If I make both of them equal to 0, then solve, so add 4 to both sides. I'm left with x equaling a +4. Here I subtract 2 on both sides, and I have x equaling a -2. So if I come to my coordinate plane here, and I put a point at +4 and a point at -2, there are a couple ways now I can find the third point, which would be my vertex. You already used the formula -b divided by 2a to find the axis of symmetry. So if I want to do that, my b is -2, so I would have a -2 divided by 2 times 1, which will give me 2 divided by 2 is 1. So I have my axis of symmetry at 1. If I put 1, and here's where you could put, if you put 1 in this top equation, or you just put 1 here and put 1 here and then multiply. 1 minus 4 is -3. 1 plus 2 is 3. So -3 times 3 is -9. So -9 would be way down here. And then I can draw my parabola. That's one way of doing that. Or if you come to your calculator and go to y equals, and I just put my quadratic in there, x squared minus 2x plus 8, actually minus 8. And then if I graph it, I'm going to change my Windows setting to this will be 10. And there you'll see it. And now if I hit second graph to see the table of values, I can use the table of values here. You can see that my vertex is at 1, -9. You can see my 0 is here for 0, and a -2 is 0. So that's another option you have when solving and graphing quadratics. Next, consider this one. So I need to know what do I multiply to get 27, but add them together gives me 12. That would be 9 and 3. If I make both of them equal to 0, So x plus 9 equaling 0, x plus 3 equaling 0. Subtract 9. I have x equaling -9 and x equaling a -3. So I have my two zeros, a -9 and -3. I'm going to graph this one. So these are my solutions. I'm going to graph this on my graphing calculator so I have more space. So I go back to my calculator, the y equals, just change the plus 12x and then plus 27. If I hit graph, you can see my parabola here. I want to see my vertex. I know it's all on the negative side, so negative 3 is one of my zeros, and -9 is one of my zeros. So these are the points that I would probably plot. And my vertex is at -6, -9. Next, solve this by factoring. So again, I think, what do I multiply to get 24? But down here gives me -10. So I know that I can have a -6 and a -4 because that gives me a positive 24 if I add, or if I multiply. And -6 plus a -4 is -10. I make both equal to 0. Add 4 to both sides. I get x equaling a positive 4. Add 6 to both sides here, and I get x equaling a positive 6. So there is my solution. Example 5, factoring a difference of squares. So a difference of squares, remember a squared minus b squared equals a plus b times a minus b. So here, perfect square here, perfect square here. So I have square root of 49 is 7 minus x. 7 plus x. And if I make both equal to 0, I can now solve. So here, I'm going to subtract 7 to get x by itself, and I get x equaling a -7. Over here, I need to make my x positive, so I'm going to add x to both sides. And I would have x equaling a positive 7. Now, I could have subtracted 7 on both sides and then divide by -1. That would still give me the same answer. This next one, also difference of two squares. So I would have two binomials. Square root of 9y squared is 3y. Square root of 16 is a positive 4 and a -4. And I make both equal to 0. And then I solve. So subtract 4. And then I have -4 equals 3y. Divide by 3. Y would equal a -4/3. On this side, I would add 4 to both sides. And then divide by 3. I would get a positive 4/3. Next, perfect square trinomial. So perfect square trinomial, I have a squared minus 2ab plus b squared equals a minus b squared. Or this could be a squared plus 2ab plus b squared equaling a plus b squared. So here, square root of 25 is 5x. Square root of 81. Actually, before this, I have to make this equal to 0. So subtract 45, and you're left with 25x squared minus 60y plus 36 equaling 0. Now I can do here. So square root of 25 is 5. Square root of x squared is x. My minus sign, square root of 36 is 6. Now if I do, I would have like another one too, 5x minus as well, because 5 times -6 is -30 times x is -30x, and then I would have to multiply it by 2 in that one. So let me just rewrite this as 5x minus 6 times 5x minus 6. These have to equal 0. This would also work with this formula because I could do a squared, which is 5x, minus 2 times 5x times 6 plus 6 squared. This fits that formula because this middle term is 60. So I just have to take one of these binomials, set it equal to 0, and solve. So add 6, 5x equals 6, divide by 5, x would equal a positive 6/5. Next one, I would add 39 to both sides. And now again, 9x squared minus 30y plus 25 equaling 0. So I'm just setting up my formula. So square root of x squared is 3x. Square root of 25 is 5. And I want to check this middle term. Negative 2 times 3x is negative 6x. Negative 6x times 5 is negative 30. So I know my binomial is 3x minus 5 equaling 0. Add 5 to both sides, and I get 3x equaling positive 5. Divided by 3, x would equal 5/3. Seventh kind of problem. Word problem, still factoring a trinomial. It says the area of an isosceles triangle. So an isosceles triangle means two of the sides are the same. And in this case, they say that each of the legs is 15 feet. The area of the whole triangle is 108 square feet. The base is 4x plus 2, and the height is 3x. I need to find the perimeter of the triangle. So perimeter is adding up all the sides. So side 1 plus side 2 plus side 3. But I'm given the area, and area of a triangle is base times height divided by 2. So if I know the area and I know the base, so the base is 4x plus 2, the height is 3x, and the area is 108. I need to get all that to one side and equal to 0. But first I'm going to distribute the 3x. So I have 12x squared plus 6x. And then I'm going to subtract 108 on both sides. And I get minus 108 equaling 0. Now I can factor this. I can factor out a 6. And then now give me 2x squared plus x minus 18 equaling 0. So then I would multiply this. This would give me a negative 36. I just realized that here I forgot to divide all this by 2. So if I divide all that by 2, I would have my 12x squared plus 4x, or 6x. And then I have to divide this by 2, which will now give me 6x squared plus 3x, and then the minus 108 equaling 0. And then I can factor out a 3 in both parts, and I get 2x squared plus x minus, and 108 divided by 3 gives you 36. This is equal to 0. And I do the long ways. This is negative 72x squared. And I know that negative 8x times 9x gives me negative 72, and then negative 8 plus 9 gives me 1. So then I bring down the sides. So 2x squared minus 8, and then 9x minus 36. And then I take my factors, which I have a factor of 3, make that equal to 0. That never works. I know that one doesn't do there. And then I have this one right here. I can factor out 2x. That leaves me with x minus 4. And then the other one, I can factor out a positive 9. That leaves me with x minus 4. So now here I have x minus 4 equaling 0, and I have 2x plus 9 equaling 0. If I add 4 to both sides, I could have x equaling 4, or I can subtract 9 on both sides and then divide by 2, and x could equal a negative 9 halves. Now, if I'm finding length, I can't have negative units, so I know it cannot be negative 9 halves. So if I put 4 in for x, I now have 4 times 4 is 16. 16 plus 2 is 18. So the base is 18, and my two sides of 15. This will give me a total perimeter of 48 feet. Next, we have an area of a rectangle, and this is 84 square inches. The length is 7x, and the width is 3x minus 9. So we need to find the perimeter. And so for perimeter, that's going to be 2 times the length plus 2 times the width. Here to find area, I have 7x times 3x minus 9. This has to equal 84. So if I distribute, that gives me 21x squared minus 63x. And I'm going to subtract this 84 right away to make it equal to 0. I can factor out a 21. That leaves me with x squared minus 3x minus 4. And I know that's x minus 4 times x plus 1. Negative 4 times 1 gives you negative 4, and negative 4 plus 1 is negative 3. So if I make everything equal to 0, so I make 21 equaling to 0, that can never happen. X minus 4 equaling 0. Add 4 to both sides. X can equal a positive 4. And if I did x plus 1 equaling 0, subtract 1 on both sides, x cannot equal a negative number, so I know it cannot be that one either. So if I put 4 in for x, I now have the length of 2 times 28, because 7 times 4 is 28, and then the width, 2 times 4 is 12, minus 9 is 3. So this will give me 56. 2 times 28 is 56 plus 6. We have a perimeter of 62 inches. Next, surface area of the prisms is 64 square centimeters. Find the volume of a prism if its height is 15 centimeters, its length is x plus 4 centimeters, and its width is x centimeters. Hint, surface area equals perimeter of the base times the height plus 2 times the base, and the volume is base times height. So let's first find the perimeter. Perimeter says the height is 15, so S equaling the height is 15. The perimeter of the base is so if its length is x plus 4 and its width is x centimeters, so I'm going to do x plus 4. Let's do 2 times x plus 4 plus 2 times x to find the perimeter of the base. So this would give me 2x plus 2x is 4x, and then plus 8. And then I'm going to add 2 times the base. And the area of the base, I take my length, which is 4x plus, or x plus 4 times the width, which is w, or not w, x. And that gives me x squared plus 4x. So if I put x squared plus 4x, this has to give me a surface area, which they said the surface area was 264. And I just realized we don't have to do that with the surface area formula. I just have to use the base times the height. So let me get rid of this. So I have to use this formula. So the volume, I don't know the volume, but the base is, the area of the base would be x plus 4 times x, which will give me x squared plus 4x. And we're going to have to multiply that by the height. And they said the height was 15. So if I distribute that, I would have x squared plus 60x. Okay, so here this is what our volume is going to be. But in order to find our volume, I need to know what x is. So to find out what x is, I have to go back to the surface area one, which they told us that surface is 4 equaling the perimeter. So I have, if my base is x plus 4, so I have two of those, and I have two widths. So that's going to give me 4x plus 8. And then I'm going to have to multiply that by the height, which is 15. And then I have 2 times the area of the base. And that is, if I were to multiply x plus 4 times x, that's going to give me x squared plus 4x. Now I'm going to want to make this equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 264 on both sides. So I'm going to do some simplifying here. So if I distribute 15, that's going to give me, so right now I have 0 equaling 15 times 4 is 60. So I have 60x. And then 15 times 8 is 120. And then I'm going to, 120, and then plus 2x squared plus 8x. And then I have a minus 264. So to simplify this and put it in standard form, I have 0 equaling 2x squared plus 68x minus 144. Because I took this 120 minus 264, it gives you a negative 144. And then I can factor out a 2, and that gives me x squared minus 34x minus 72. And then I just factor it. This will give me x minus 2 times x plus 34. And if I make each of them equal to 0, the only one that's going to give me a positive solution is this middle one. So if I add 2 to both sides, I would have x equaling 2. So if x equals 2, I can just put 2 in for x here. And I'm left with 4 plus 120. So now if x is 2, now I use the perimeter. So the base here. So the base here would give me x times x. So this would be 2 and then a 2. So 6 times 2 would give you 12. And then times the height, 15. This is going to give us an area of 180, or a volume of 180. So that would be letter C. The last parts, write a quadratic function given the zeros. So you're going to be writing the equation. So to write the equation, you have to find, it says find the factors, but really it's find the zeros. Determine whether the value of a is positive or negative, because it's going to open upward or negative, or upward or downward. And then you're going to use another point on the graph to define a. So an example. Here we need to write a quadratic equation for this one. So my zeros are here and here. So if I have x equaling a -2 and x equaling 6, I need to make that equal to 0. So I would add 2 to both sides, and I'm left with x plus 2 equaling 0. That's one of my binomials. The other one, I subtract 6 on both sides, and I get x minus 6 equaling 0. That's my other one. I need to find my a and have my equation in this format. Y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Now I need to find a, so that means I need to use an x and a y coordinates. And I can choose any point that's on the blue line. I could choose this point, this point, this point. So I'm going to choose this one because it's easier. So that'd be 0 and -6. So if x is 0, and my y is -6, I can now solve. This would give me 2 times -6 times a gives me -12a equaling -6. Get a by itself, I divide by -12. A would equal 1/2. So if a is 1/2, I just substitute it in here, and then I can solve. I'm going to FOIL here, and I get x squared minus 4x minus 12, and I have to multiply that by 1/2. So my equation would be 1/2 x squared minus 2x minus 6. Next, identify my zeros. So this is a -3 and this is a +3. So that means I have x equaling a -3 and x equaling a +3. So add 3 to both sides. I get x plus 3 equaling 0. Subtract 3 on both sides, and I get x minus 3 equaling 0. So I need to find a when x plus 3 and x minus 3 and x plus 3. If I need to choose a point, again, I would choose this point, which is 0, -3. So -3 in for y. I don't know my a, but my x is 0. So now I have -3 times 3 times a, which is -9a, equaling -3. Solve for a, divide by -9. A would equal 1/3. So I put that in for this a and I solve. I know this part is a difference of 2 squares, which means this is x squared minus 9. And then I have to multiply that by 1/3. So my equation would be y equals 1/3 x squared minus 3. Next one, quadratic function that represents the given graph. So I have a point at -2, and that looks like half. So x equaling -2 and x equaling 1/2. So if I add 2, I now have x plus 2. Here, subtract half, I have x minus 1/2. Now I need to pick a point that I know the coordinates of. I know this coordinates. This is 2, -3. So if I put -3 in for y, Need to find the a when x is 2. So 2 plus 2 times 2 minus 1/2. So this is 4 times 1 and 1/2. 1 and 1/2 is 3/2. This will give me 6a equaling -3. Divide by 6, a would equal -1/2. And if I substitute that in here, I would now have 1/2, -1/2 times x squared, x times -1/2 plus x times 2. So that'd be negative or positive 3/2 x. And then 2 times -1/2 is a -1. So if I distribute, I end up with a -1/2 x squared. So that already eliminates d and b. -1/2 times 3/2 is -3/4. So a -3/4, the only one that has -3/4 would be letter A. And this would give me a positive 1/2. So letter A would give us our final answer. Now to the last ones, if they don't give us a graph, they give us coordinates, we can still do the same thing. We just identify our zeros. And this would be x plus 7 times x minus 1. And I need to solve for a. So my x, this is where I use my other point, x and my y. If I put -30 in for y, solve for a when x is -4. I now have 3 times -5 is -15. A equaling -30. Divide by -15. A would equal 2. If I put 2 back up here, I now have 2 times x squared minus or plus 6x minus 7. I just FOILed this. Distribute the 2. I now have y equaling 2x squared plus 12x minus 14. Another one, my zeros. So now I have y equaling a times x plus 8 times x minus 1/2. Need to substitute this in for my x and y. So y is -8. Find a when x is 0. So 8 times -1/2 is -4a equaling -8. Divide by -4, a would equal 2. If I plug that back in here, FOIL it, I now have y equaling 2 times x squared plus 7.5, which will be 15/2 x, and then minus 4. Then I distribute the 2. My equation is y equals 2x squared plus 15x minus 8. And our last one, which quadratic function has a graph that contains these points? So I find my zeros. So that means I have x plus 5/2 times x minus 7/2. Use this point. So I have 35 equaling a times 1 plus 5/2 times 1 minus 7/2. On my calculator, 1 plus 5/2 equals 3.5. Multiply that by 1 minus 7 halves. Gives me a total of negative 8.75, which as a fraction, that would be negative 35 halves. So I have negative 35 fourths. We have 35 fourths A equaling 35. I multiply this by 4 over negative 35. I now have negative 4 divided by, or 4 divided by negative 1, which A would give you negative 4. So now if I put negative 4 back up here, FOIL this, so this would give me I equals negative 4 times x squared. And then negative 7 halves plus 5 halves will give us negative 2 halves, which negative 2 halves is negative 1x. And then 5 halves times negative 7 halves is negative 35 fourths. And if I distribute, that gives me y equals negative 4x squared plus 4x minus, or plus 35. The only one that gives me that exact answer would be letter B. That is the lesson on solving quadratics by factoring.